Hello, my name is Ashlyn Gregory, and I'm the gallery assistant at Cambridge Art Galleries and the curator of Cast Shadow by artist Sofia Eleni Escobar. Located at the Hespeler branch of Cambridge Public Library, this installation features Sofia's large-scale woven sculptures and intricate pen and ink illustrations. Reflecting the rich history of textile manufacturing in Hespeler, Sofia's work reimagines textiles in conversation with space, light, and language. Today, I'll be speaking with Sofia to learn more about her artistic practice. Thank you for joining me, Sofia.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your practice?
Yep. My name is Sofia. I'm a textile artist. I was born in Peru, and I also lived in Ecuador for a long time. My family is also from there, so I spent kind of like half of my life in South America and half of my life here. I studied the fiber program at OCAD University, so my work is very informed by textiles and materials that relate to textiles. Yeah.
Wonderful. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about how your work is inspired by your upbringing in Peru and Ecuador, drawing on that rich Andean textile tradition. How do you approach translating this traditional textile language into a sculptural context?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I grew up in Peru and Ecuador. We moved around a lot with my family, but my family still lives there. So I'm still very connected with the space, the place there, and with my family and the culture there. What something that I always remember growing up is um, going to the markets, the textile markets, and seeing all the textiles like patterns and colors. And as a kid, I remember being always blown away by like the intricacy of all the like hand woven textiles. There's a really rich culture with embroidery as well. So I was always fascinated by that. I also grew up with a lot of like doing a lot of crafts at home, so that kind of like became like a natural thing to me. Uh, so yeah, I in Ecuador as well. There's a really big like textile culture too. So I always inspired by that. A lot of the textiles, the Peruvian textiles, are very kind of like abstract patterns as well. And I always thought it was really interesting how they created like a language with like different symbols and it could be done in like an abstract way. So that was always kind of in the back of my head, like thinking about how they built these things and like how they wove everything by hand and like they also dye everything by hand with natural materials and just thinking about like the production of textiles like back in the day and how it has changed a lot with like industries and everything. So yeah, that was kind of how I my interest kind of sparked in terms of like textiles and like how they're made, how they're produced, and also as an art form too, as a craft. So kind of from there I also started doing like a lot of drawings, and like I would naturally just draw a lot of like patterns and like fill the pages with patterns and stuff like that. So it was a very organic type of development of my work, like thinking about that. And yeah, that was kind of my upbringing there. And then I moved to Toronto to study university, and then I found this program, the textile program at OCAD, which kind of I learned different ways of thinking about textiles and thinking about space and thinking about them in a more like sculptural, three-dimensional way. So I started experimenting a lot with different materials and different technologies. I started doing a lot of like laser cutting acrylic. and just like seeing, trying to see like, oh, what if I did like an embroidery piece on acrylic, or like using materials that you're not really supposed to be using as textiles, but using them just to see how they would, you know, they would behave as well in the space. And yeah, it's slowly like doing research and like just trying with different materials. I was um, I was able to like think more like three-dimensional. Yeah, that was kind of how it started.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely see the influence of those traditional textiles in your work, particularly in the abstract shapes and the colors and the
Mhm.
handmade element of your work. That's very
Yeah.
fascinating to me, how you sort of marry these technologies like the laser cutting and using acrylic with what is a very handmade process. Textiles
Hmm.
in general, textiles are a very like tactile craft oriented medium.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
how do you think you marry those two elements?
Yes. So yeah, so like for me it was kind of like keeping like the tradition of like making with your hands and like keeping like the craft tradition, but like kind of making it my own in a way, and like my own process. And I still use this a lot of same processes of like, weaving and like, cutting the thread by hand. Each thread, there's like hundreds of threads that I have to cut. The same if you were like setting up a loom kind of thing. I use the same kind of process for that. um, and then I've also done a little bit of dyeing as well of the thread. Sometimes I do that. And yeah, it's like the physical labor of threading each thread through each hole and like going up and down. That's kind of like what keeps it like, you know kind of my practice in that way. There's not a lot, even though if I use like laser cutting and stuff, there's not a lot of time that I spend in the computer. It's all of the like the designs that I do. When I start making them, I make them on paper on 2D. And then and then I once I have the shape in 2D, then I would like try to translate that in three-dimensional space in my head. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more of that about that creative process and how you conceptualize your sculptures and then bring them to life. It sounds really fascinating in that, again, you're marrying these
Mhm.
handmade techniques with some more conceptual work. So, like, do you sketch your designs out first? And how do you bring these sculptures to life?
Yeah, my process is actually super simple. It's like some people think that I do these crazy 3D renderings before I make any piece, and I'm like, no, I literally use like a grid paper, and I trace like the 2D, like how I would imagine the sculpture being in 2D, and then I measure like each placing of the acrylic. And then once I have that in my head, I'm like, okay, now I can make the flat shapes, which are the discs, right? Once I have the height and like the width that I like. And then I bring that, basically the 2D. I make a Illustrator file that's basically for printing, for laser cutting, and I make the discs there. So it's honestly like kind of all in my head. Like once I see the illustration, I'm like, okay, this needs these many holes. So I just do it by hand. It's very like rudimentary. It's very simple. I do like it that way. I don't like to use 3D rendering programs too much, because it just takes away from like the magic of like, oh, like how is this actually going to look in real life? So I do like the surprise element a little bit, but everything is still very like measured, like, very exact. And then I choose the yeah, I choose the acrylic. Sometimes I've also been exploring more doing it in metal, so I would use metal in that case, and then I get it laser cut at a shop here in Toronto locally, and then I get my shapes. And then what I do first is like I hang from the ceiling. I have like hanging systems, and then I would start building the shape with the acrylic first. So I have all the acrylic first built, and then once that's done and it's like perfectly measured, then I would start doing all like the threading. I would like measure the thread. I usually get the thread at like local shops in Toronto. A lot of the cotton that I buy is made in Peru actually, but I buy them in stores here in Toronto. And they have like a lot of really beautiful colors. So like I like to kind of just play around with what combinations like I think would work. I usually like to use like a darker color and a lighter one just to like add a little bit more kind of optical illusion and so you can see the shapes a little bit better. I also like to combine different shapes that weave in between each other. Um, and then yeah, and then I cut the thread, which is also a really long process, and then I start kind of like weaving the piece together, and yeah, and they actually also collapse as well, so they travel very very easily. Yeah.
Yeah, I can attest that they do collapse, and
Yes.
they're really
Yeah.
great to install in that way because they're quite small, and then seeing them
Mhm.
expand and come to life is really
Yeah.
magical. No,
Yeah.
it's
You
great to
won't
hear.
imagine what's there, like this
Yes,
flat piece. Yeah.
yeah, it's great to hear a little bit more about your process and everything that goes into it. It seems like there's a lot of precision and a lot of
Mhm.
math that's involved in making these sculptures. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about this relationship between your art and mathematics and design?
Yeah, so a lot of it comes from also like I think pattern design and textiles, like surface design, like combining different shapes together, and like even that element of designing, let's say like patterns on fabric, that's also very specific as well, and there's a lot of math that is you have to think about when like let's say if you want to print a repeat pattern, you have to have everything exact, so like when you're printing it, it's not off. And so I think I learned that kind of like um that way of like measuring exactly things, and also like I would say I've always been interested in like drawing with grids and drawing perspective. That also has come kind of like naturally to me, and like pattern design is kind of very related also to mathematics as well, and how like in general in history that's they're kind of combined with each other. So yeah, I try to apply those kind of things into my work as well, but in a way that's a little bit more playful as well. And it's not so, I mean, there is some type of engineering that goes into it, but I also I try to also have fun with it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There's often quite like a divide between art and mathematics, I find, but really they're
Mhm.
quite related, especially in terms
Yeah.
of like making patterns, like you said,
Mhm.
and just taking measurements and working. As soon as you're working in 3D, you need to introduce
Yeah.
math into the equation.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, things have to be measured, and especially because these pieces are like they're like hanging, and they have to be perfectly balanced, because if one disc is not like, right, then it won't balance properly, and then the discs are just gonna be like all over the place. So that's something that I always have to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And that precision that you have and the ability to maintain this balance is what really drew me to your work
Mhm.
originally. And I think it really works in the space by creating these gorgeous optical illusions. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the relationship between your sculptural work and your pen and ink work. So in your pen and ink drawings, you're drawing out these beautiful, intricate grids, very precise, very measured. And it works similarly to your sculptures. How do you see these two bodies of work relating to each other?
Yeah, I my ink drawings, like it kind of, that was kind of the start of my like practice a little bit with like pattern design and doing like just my interest in space also, and like how like artwork can live in these spaces, or like textiles living as sculptures, and like how we humans relate to it. So like I guess that's kind of a translation into my drawings of like three-dimensional space and patterns. Um, I wish I wasn't so like mathematical about my drawings too, but it's just that's the way that I make it. And like, yeah, but it's also, I try also with my illustrations, same as my sculptures, to like not be like super specific of what I'm doing. Like I like to have some freedom on like literally just grab a pen and a ruler and then just start making lines, and then things kind of organically start shaping. So I don't like to like overthink it too much. Um, Even though it looks like I do. But yeah, it's kind of also having a little bit of freedom of like, oh, it's going, it's like it's going where it's going, and trusting the process with it. And yeah, a lot of the illustrations that I started doing, that's kind of how I started thinking about three-dimensional space. And I'm like, oh well, maybe I can do this in like, in real life in a 3D sculpture. So that's kind of how they relate to each other, and they kind of are like sketches to like other works that I'm always thinking about. And yeah, maybe I'll transform some of my illustrations that you guys have there into three-dimensional sculptures. Yeah.
Yeah, there's such fantastic drawings because I do see that element of like organic and spontaneity in them
Mhm.
because they're such unique shapes. They're not
Yeah.
necessarily like perfect polygons or um,
Yeah.
shapes like that. Yeah, they're really beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you.
So your installation at Hespeler, as you were mentioning, it features both your 3D sculptural works and your pen and ink drawings. And the name of this installation is Cast Shadow. Can you talk a little bit about how your sculptures work with light and how that informs how you create them?
Yeah, so a lot of, the kind of the magic of like these sculptures comes from also like the shadow that is casted on the walls. I feel like it does add like a really huge element to the piece. And the acrylic also kind of emanates some type of light, which is cool. So it's like you're not only having the shadows casted on the wall, but like also the acrylic adds all of these like light, like kind of animated light. So yeah, when I started doing that, and I started like doing my sculptures and seeing just the cast shadow on the wall, I was like, wow, this, it almost makes it part of the piece. So I always think about that also when making my work, like they're kind of like a, yin and yang type of thing. And yeah, so I think also that's why I've also decided to use also acrylic in my work, so you can actually, when you cast the light, you can see it on the wall, and it like, and it has this illusion that there's like another piece sometimes. And if you have it in a place where this you can see the sun like throughout the day, like the cast shadow changes a lot, and it animates. And I feel like that's such a beautiful part of like the sculpture as well in itself. It just kind of comes to light with it comes to life with the light. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I love about this installation is its interaction with light. And Hespeler is
Mhm.
such a bright space; it's almost all windows. So
Yeah.
seeing how it changes throughout the day is really beautiful. And I also think that the shadows sort of echo the line work of your pen and ink illustration. So
Mhm.
it's a great combo in that way.
Yeah, 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 exactly. They do look like my illustrations as well. Yeah.
So this is not your first time exhibiting with Cambridge Art Galleries. You actually
Hmm.
exhibited with us back in 2020 for Fiberworks. Could you talk
Yeah.
a little bit about that work and your experience and how your practice has changed since then?
Yeah, so yeah, I remember participating in that exhibition. It was pretty awesome. It was actually the first year of the pandemic that year, so unfortunately I couldn't. I mean, nobody could make it to the exhibition, but it still happened. And yeah, that was actually one of my first pieces that was like larger scale that I started experimenting with scale. And since then, I've actually been doing like going even larger and larger and just kind of experimenting with different materials and more like industrial materials. And after that work, I actually did a collection of like really large scale sculptures that were made out of metal. That was my first time doing it in metal and like paracord rope. So it's like a nylon rope that also can be, a sculpture that can also live outdoors. So also kind of like thinking about like where these sculptures can also live indoors or outdoors and how they would, how would they kind of interact with the environment. I did another piece out after that, also a piece outdoors for a festival in Toronto in the waterfront. So that was an interesting experience to see how the piece would react with the environment. And yeah, and I'm developing more pieces now, like getting more into embroidery as well, with embroidering now metal and like acrylic and like combining different materials. I like to just explore different materials and see how textiles can work with industrial materials as well. So that's kind of where I'm going.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear how you're continuing to grow your practice and experimenting with new materials, especially the industrial materials. I think that relationship
Yeah.
between industry and textiles is so fascinating,
Mhm.
and it really works with the space at Hespeler because Hespeler was a major textile manufacturer for a very long
Mhm.
time, and
Yeah.
actually the windows at Hespeler have patterns from a loom on them. So
Oh wow,
yeah,
cool.
so it all comes full circle that
Yeah, yeah,
way.
yeah, full circle. Yeah, that's awesome.
And do you have any upcoming projects that you're excited about? Anything that you're working on right now that you're able to share with us?
Yeah, well, I might be doing a residency next year. It's not super confirmed, so I can't really say anything about it much. But yeah, I'm trying to just take some time to like keep developing some more work and experimenting with more materials and stuff. So hopefully by next year I'll have something more concrete to share. Yeah.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Sophia, for taking the time to chat
Yeah.
with me and to answer these questions about your practice.
Thank you. And thanks for having me at the Hespeler. It's been a really great experience. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear.
Yeah.
So, Sophia's installation is on view on the second floor of Cambridge Public Library, Hespeler, until July 2026.